What if the greatest warning Jesus ever gave you was not about surviving an external apocalypse, but about recognizing 3 internal sanctuaries where your soul can find absolute refuge when everything around you collapses? You have heard the prophecies about tribulation, about escaping to distant mountains, about the mark and the beast. But what remains hidden from most spiritual seekers is this: the real apocalypse is not happening out there in the world alone. It is happening inside the architecture of your own consciousness, in the depths where you have been trained to deny your own shadow, to split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts, to project your darkness onto others rather than integrate it. Jesus knew this. Jung knew this too. And if you subscribe to this channel and activate notifications, you will discover an entire series exploring how these 3 sanctuaries operate simultaneously in your physical reality, your psychological depth, and your transpersonal communion with the divine. The insights we share here build progressively each week, revealing the practical methods to awaken these refugees before crisis forces the transformation. Check the description and pinned comment for the full playlist on this teaching, because understanding these sanctuaries is not optional. It is the foundation of true spiritual maturity. Now, let us journey into what Jesus actually meant when he spoke of flight to the desert, and why Jung's map of the psyche is the most accurate prophecy of our collective future. The sign has begun, not in the sky above you, but in the collective psyche, where denial has finally reached its breaking point. When you observe the polarization that makes dialogue impossible, the ritualized vilification of those labeled as the enemy, the ideologies that demand blind obedience in exchange for false safety, the exponential advancement of technology that outpaces human ethics, these are not random chaos. These are symptoms of what Jung called the eruption of the collective shadow. For generations, humanity has refused to see itself. We project onto others everything we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The shadow does not disappear through denial. It grows, it compounds, it waits, and when the pressure becomes too intense, when unconscious repression can no longer contain what is being denied, the shadow erupts with force that seems apocalyptic precisely because it has been so thoroughly denied for so long. Jesus warned about this moment. He was not speaking in mere religious poetry. He was describing a psychological inevitability that happens every time a civilization refuses to mature, to integrate its dark side, to look honestly at what it has become. The tribulation is not punishment from a vengeful God. It is the natural consequence of collective unconsciousness meeting collective denial at the point of rupture. But here is what transforms this understanding from mere intellectual knowledge into lived wisdom. There exist 3 dimensions of refuge that operate simultaneously, and you must establish yourself in all 3 or your escape will fail at every level. The first sanctuary is material and geographic, the second is psychological and interior, the third is transpersonal and divine. Jesus spoke of this in symbolic language that the modern mind has largely forgotten how to interpret. When he said, "Flee to the mountains," he was not speaking in code language requiring mystical decryption by seminary scholars. He was speaking literally, while simultaneously speaking to the deepest layers of your soul. This is the double language of profound truth. It operates on every level at once. In the first dimension, you must prepare your physical body and material life to survive what is coming. In the second dimension, you must psychologically die to the tyrant you have internalized and the false authorities you have unknowingly served. In the third dimension, you must restore the living communion with your own divine center, that image of God that already dwells within you as your authentic self. Consider the first sanctuary, the geographic and physical reality. Throughout the ancient texts, when the system of control becomes total and persecution becomes unavoidable, the refuge is always a place that cannot be tracked by the technology of the persecuting power. Petra, the rock city carved into mountains in what is now Jordan, represents this principle perfectly. It has a single entry point that can be defended. It has sources of water flowing from underground springs that require no external infrastructure. It exists outside any surveillance network of the contemporary technological order. But even more symbolically, Petra is literally the rock. And in all the prophetic traditions, the rock is the foundation that does not shake when everything else collapses. Without a plan for physical escape, without knowledge of geography, without communities already organizing for survival, you will surrender to the system simply because panic and hunger will override your principles. This is not paranoia. This is preparedness. Jesus taught us to be wise as serpents. Wisdom includes practical planning, but here is the element that 99% of contemporary teachers refuse to acknowledge because they do not understand Jung's contribution to biblical interpretation. You cannot escape to Petra. You cannot arrive at geographic safety while you remain psychologically enslaved to the very culture you are fleeing. The technology of totalitarianism operates on 3 levels simultaneously, and the mark of the beast is the mechanism by which all 3 levels lock into place. On the surface level, the mark is economic. Without it, you are excluded from food systems, water systems, medicine systems, shelter systems. The physical pressure becomes unbearable. Starvation will force submission far more effectively than any police state. But this external mark, this economic prison, only functions because of what happens at a deeper level. The mark becomes accepted internally, in the structure of your psyche, through what Jung identified as the negative paternal complex. This is the internalization of a tyrannical authority to which you, at some unconscious level, have consented. You believe that obedience equals safety. You believe that submission to the system equals belonging. You believe that without the mark, you will be alone, abandoned, defenseless. This is the psychological mark, and it is more binding than any physical implant could ever be because it originates from within your own consciousness. The second sanctuary, then, is the psychological desert. It is the inner wilderness where you must face the tyrant you have internalized and consciously refuse him. This is not rebellion against legitimate authority. This is liberation from false authority that you have invited into the temple of your own mind. Jung's concept of individuation describes precisely this process, the integration of the shadow self, the death of the false ego that was constructed to please others, the awakening to your authentic nature. In this desert, you will meet the greatest enemy you have ever faced, and this enemy is yourself. Specifically, it is the part of you that prefers comfort to freedom, that chooses familiar chains over unfamiliar wilderness, that wants to believe that the system loves you even as it destroys you. You must face this part. You must look at how you surrendered your power, your voice, your own decision-making authority to authorities that should have guided you toward freedom, but instead trained you in obedience. You internalized the voice of the critic. You learned to distrust your own instincts. You adopted the shame that others projected onto you. You became the prison guard of your own consciousness. The psychological desert requires what the religious institutions almost never teach: reclamation of your personal power. This is not ego inflation. This is not narcissism. This is the courageous recognition that you have been giving away to external authorities, the very authority that belongs to your own soul. You have consented, again and again, to have your decisions made by others because you were terrified of the responsibility of true freedom. The cost has been massive. Every time you suppress your authentic voice to maintain approval, you fragment your soul a little more. Every time you deny your genuine feelings to comply with what others demand, you betray yourself a little more. Every time you silence your intuition to follow the prescribed path, you weaken your connection to your own divinity. This fragmentation is the internal mark, And no geographic escape, no physical distance from the system will free you while this fragmentation remains. You will carry the prison inside you. You will feel unsafe even in safety. You will feel unworthy even in sanctuary. The task in this second sanctuary is the systematic, courageous work of reintegration. You must identify the internal tyrant, the voice of the critic, the internalized authority that runs your decision-making, the shame that was installed in you by parents, teachers, religious authorities, cultural conditioning. You must trace where this voice originated. You must see how you have obeyed it, how you have limited yourself based on its commands, how you have contracted yourself to fit into shapes that were never meant to contain your authentic nature. And then you must make a conscious choice. You will hear this voice, but you will no longer obey it. You will acknowledge it as an outdated program, something that was useful perhaps when you were young and needed guidance, but which has become a prison. You will develop the capacity to listen to your own deepest knowing, your own intuition, your own connection to something greater than your conditioned mind. This is death and rebirth. This is the crucifixion of the false self and the resurrection of the true self. The work of the psychological desert is profound and cannot be rushed. It involves bringing consciousness to the places where you are still asleep, still controlled, still operating from fear and conditioned patterns. It involves therapy, deep meditation, spiritual work, shadow work, honest dialogue with yourself about your own complicity in your own imprisonment. It involves grieving the years you spent diminished, and then forgiveness. Not forgiveness of those who controlled you, though that may come, but forgiveness of yourself for having accepted the diminishment. When you complete this work, when you have truly faced and integrated your shadow, when you have reclaimed your personal authority and your connection to your own intuitive wisdom, something miraculous happens. You are no longer afraid. You cannot be controlled through shame because you have faced your shame and discovered that beneath it is simply human experience. You cannot be manipulated through promises of security because you have learned that the only true security is your own connection to what is real within you. You have become, in the language of the mystics, a free person. But there exists a third sanctuary, so hidden, so profound, that most spiritual seekers spend their entire lives looking for it everywhere except precisely where it already exists. This is the transpersonal sanctuary, the communion with the divine that is not distant, not abstract, not something you must achieve through correct behavior or perfect belief. Jung called this the self with a capital S. The archetypal center of your total being, the image of God already present in the depths of your own consciousness, the ground of your existence, from which all authentic power, all genuine healing, all real transformation originates. When the ancient texts speak of being born again, this is what they mean. Not adoption of a new belief system, not exchange of one ideology for another, but the awakening to the reality that has always been there, that you are already, at your deepest level, divine. This is perhaps the most radical teaching Jesus offered, and also the most consistently misunderstood. He said, "You are the temple of the Holy Spirit." Not that the Holy Spirit might visit you, not that the Holy Spirit is distant and must be called down, but that you are, right now, a dwelling place of the divine. The separateness you feel, the distance between yourself and God, is not the ultimate reality. It is the illusion created by ego identification, by the false self that you have been trained to construct. When you begin to dissolve this false self, when you stop believing that you must earn your way into the presence of God, when you stop trying to be acceptable and simply allow yourself to be, something opens. You discover that the divine has never been separate from you. It has been waiting with infinite patience for you to stop running away from yourself and recognize what has always been true. The third sanctuary is the desert of contemplative silence. It is the space where all the doing ceases and you simply are. It is not a place of despair or emptiness, though it may feel that way initially when all your defenses are stripped away and all your accomplishments reveal themselves as insufficient. It is a place of profound communion, of hearing the deepest truth about yourself and existence, of touching something that transcends the linear time in which you normally live. In the ancient texts, this is described through the image of the woman in the wilderness sustained for a time, times and half a time, 1260 days. But notice that this is not presented as torture to be endured. It is presented as a period where divine sustenance arrives continuously, where each day expands into infinity, where the presence of God becomes as tangible as bread, as real as water flowing from impossible sources. This is the promise of the third sanctuary. If you have completed the work in the first two sanctuaries, if you have prepared your material life and your psychological depths, you will find that the divine presence sustains you in ways that transcend ordinary understanding. The miracles are not suspension of natural law. They are the perception available only to those who have stopped doubting their own connection to the source of all existence. When you are truly aligned with your authentic self, when the ego has ceased its constant grasping and planning, you perceive the fundamental generosity of existence. You see that you are already being provided for, already being held, already being guided. The anxiety dissolves. The fear that has structured so much of your life reveals itself as unnecessary, and you discover the freedom that Jesus was speaking about when he said that the truth shall make you free. Not freedom from external circumstances, freedom from the internal prison of doubt and fear and separateness. Now examine the mechanism of the mark more completely, because this understanding is essential. The mark operates on all three levels simultaneously, creating a triple lock that cannot be broken by working on only one level. On the external level, you are locked out of economic participation. On the psychological level, you are locked into identification with the system as your identity and source of security. On the transpersonal level, you have severed your connection to the divine by directing your worship, your obedience, your spiritual allegiance to something other than the source of all being. The ancient text says explicitly, if anyone receives the mark of the beast, he worships the beast. Worship means total alignment of will. It means offering the seat of your authority, the throne of your consciousness, to an external power. It means choosing separation from the divine in exchange for the illusion of security. This is why the text is so clear that the choice is absolute. There is no compromise position. You cannot partially accept the mark. You cannot receive it while maintaining spiritual alignment with the divine. The system itself, in its totality, depends on your fragmentation. It depends on your acceptance of the split between body and spirit, between your authentic desires and acceptable behavior, between your true self and your social self. The system thrives on your internal division because a unified consciousness cannot be controlled. A person who knows their own divine nature, who trusts their own intuition, who has faced and integrated their shadow, cannot be manipulated through shame or fear or the promise of security. Such a person must be either killed or left alone. There is no middle ground for control. This is the ultimate secret that the text has always held. You are not separated from the divine. The obstacle is not that God is distant. The obstacle is that you have been trained to believe you are not worthy, not pure, not deserving of direct communion. You have been taught that you must go through intermediaries, must perform correct actions, must believe correct doctrines, must be acceptable before you can have access to the sacred. But this is precisely the lie that the system of the mark depends on. Because the moment you recognize your own divine nature, the moment you realize that the sacred is not distant, but intimately present in the depths of your own being, the power of external control vanishes. You cannot be enslaved to a system by someone who has awakened to their own freedom. The preparation for what is coming, therefore, is not merely tactical. It is not simply about learning survival skills or studying maps or identifying safe locations. Though these things have their place, the real preparation is the work of consciousness. It is the work of recognizing the false authorities you have internalized. It is the work of withdrawing your psychological allegiance from systems that you know, deep down, are fundamentally dishonest. It is the work of restoring your connection to something greater than yourself that is simultaneously most intimate with yourself. It is the work of becoming whole. What does this work look like practically? First, you must begin the process of identifying your internalized tyrant. In meditation or in therapy or in honest self-reflection, begin to notice the voice of criticism in your mind. Whose voice is it really? What does it want from you? What would happen if you refused to obey it? You may find that this voice belongs to a parent, a teacher, a religious authority figure, a cultural message. You may discover that you have spent decades trying to earn the approval of someone who would never give it, because that person was themselves imprisoned. The moment you see this clearly, something shifts. The voice loses its power. You have named it. You have brought it to consciousness. It can no longer control you from the shadows. Second, you must actively reclaim domains of your life where you have surrendered your own authority. Where are you saying yes when your body is saying no? Where are you suppressing your authentic feelings to maintain approval? Where are you going along with what you don't believe because you fear the consequences of honesty? Start small. Start with the places where you feel the resistance most acutely. Practice saying no. Practice speaking your truth. Practice disappointing others when honesty requires it. Practice the terrifying freedom of being yourself, even when yourself is not what others want you to be. Third, begin the work of deepening your direct communion with the sacred. This is not about adopting new beliefs. This is about developing the capacity to listen inwardly, to hear the deepest knowing that exists in your own consciousness, to trust the intuition and guidance that emerges when you quiet the noise of your conditioned mind. Meditation is one path, prayer is another. Contemplative time in nature, honest dialogue with your own soul, dreams, active imagination, all of these are doors to the communion you seek. The key is sincerity. The divine does not require correct techniques or perfect words. It responds to genuine seeking, to honest inquiry, to the willingness to be transformed. Fourth, begin to establish community. You cannot do this work alone. You need witnesses. You need people who have recognized their own freedom and can reflect this back to you. You need to know that you are not crazy for questioning what everyone accepts. You need to feel the power of others who have chosen authenticity and freedom and the difficult work of becoming whole. Find your people. Connect with the communities who are already preparing, not just physically but psychologically and spiritually. Consider that the greatest teaching Jesus offered was about integration. He came to unite what religion had split. He came to reveal that the sacred is not distant, but present in the ordinary, in the body, in sexuality, in earthly life. The religions that followed him often inverted his teaching, creating new splits, teaching that matter is evil and spirit is good, that the body is the enemy and the soul is the prison, that desire is sinful and divinity is distant. But the original teaching was about wholeness. It was about the sacred married to the earthly, spirit integrated with body, desire recognized as a sacred force that can be transformed into creative power. When you undergo the work of the three sanctuaries, you are not rejecting the world. You are not fleeing into denial or escapism. You are becoming whole in the world. You are integrating the parts of yourself that your upbringing taught you to deny. You are reclaiming the authentic power that was always yours. You are awakening to the reality that the divine is not separate from the earthly, that the sacred is woven through the ordinary, that your own being is a manifestation of cosmic creative force. This is the ultimate defense against the system of the mark. Because the system depends on your fragmentation. It depends on your belief that you are unworthy, incomplete, needing external validation to be acceptable. It depends on your fear of your own power. It depends on your denial of your shadow. The moment you become whole, the moment you truly integrate yourself, the system has no leverage. You cannot be manipulated because you are no longer divided against yourself. You cannot be controlled because you have recognized your own divine authority. You cannot be enslaved because you have tasted true freedom. The question that faces you now is not whether to believe the prophecies. The question is whether you are willing to do the work. Are you willing to face your own shadow? Are you willing to withdraw your psychological allegiance from systems that you know are fundamentally dishonest? Are you willing to disturb the peace of your familiar prison in order to access real freedom? Are you willing to develop the direct communion with the divine that alone can sustain you when everything else collapses? These are not comfortable questions. The comfortable path is the path of denial, continued fragmentation, slow accommodation to the system of control. The uncomfortable path is the path of becoming whole. But only the whole person can enter the three sanctuaries. Only the integrated being can truly survive what is coming. And so the invitation stands before you. The signal has begun. The eruption of the collective shadow is accelerating. The technologies of total control are advancing. The window of opportunity to do this psychological and spiritual work, while there is still space for gradual transformation, is narrowing. You can continue as you have been, fragmented and afraid, hoping that somehow the system will evolve, that somehow power will distribute itself fairly, that somehow everything will work out. Or you can begin now. Begin with the small acts of reclaiming your authority. Begin with the practice of deepening your inner communion. Begin with the search for community and truth. Begin with the acknowledgement that you are already, at your deepest level, free. The three sanctuaries are waiting. They have always been waiting. They cannot be built or constructed. They can only be recognized and inhabited. The real escape was never geographic. It was always about remembering who you truly are. Jung understood something that most spiritual practitioners still miss. The collective unconscious does not wait for permission. It does not respect your comfort level or your timeline. The shadow that humanity has denied for millennia is not content to remain hidden anymore. It is erupting into visibility everywhere, in the polarization you see in every nation, in the breakdown of institutions that once provided false safety, in the acceleration of technological change that outpaces human adaptation, in the collective anxiety that has become so normalized that people no longer even notice they are living in fear. This eruption is not punishment. It is invitation. It is the psyche's way of saying that fragmentation can no longer be sustained. Wholeness is not optional anymore. It is the only viable path forward. The three sanctuaries exist not as separate locations, but as three dimensions of the same unified refuge. When you establish yourself in the first sanctuary, your material preparedness, your geographic awareness, your practical readiness, you are honoring the truth that spirit must incarnate in matter. You are acknowledging that the divine works through the physical world, not in opposition to it. Many spiritual traditions teach contempt for the body, for the material world, for practical preparation. This teaching is not spiritual wisdom, it is spiritual bypass. It is the remnant of a dualism that has infected Western spirituality for centuries. The body is not the enemy. Matter is not evil. Your desire for food, shelter, community, safety, these are not lower impulses to be transcended, but sacred expressions of your will to live. When you establish yourself in the second sanctuary, the psychological work of integrating your shadow, reclaiming your authority, withdrawing your allegiance from false authorities, you are doing the deep interior labor that makes genuine freedom possible. This work is not comfortable. It requires you to see yourself clearly, including the ways you have collaborated in your own diminishment. It requires you to grieve what might have been if you had not accepted the limitations that were imposed on you. It requires you to forgive yourself for the decades spent asleep, spent complicit, spent diminished. But this grieving is the path to authentic power. On the other side of facing these truths is a person who can no longer be manipulated, who cannot be shamed because they have looked at their own shame and found it to be simply human experience, who is free because they have faced the internal tyrant and chosen to obey themselves instead. When you establish yourself in the third sanctuary, the deepening communion with your own divine nature, the awakening to the sacred that has never been separate from you, you touch something that transcends time and circumstance. You discover that beneath all the fear, all the fragmentation, all the conditioning that has structured your life, there exists a ground of being that is untouchable. No system can control it. No authority can diminish it. No amount of external pressure can separate you from it because it is not external at all. It is the very ground of your existence. It is what you are before you are anything else. This is the teaching that transforms victims into survivors, prisoners into free people, the fragmented into the whole. And it is a teaching that has been available since the beginning, but is most clearly articulated in the words of Jesus and the depth psychology of Jung, two great cartographers of the human soul who understood that the real battle is not external, but internal, that the real enemy is not out there but inside, and that the real victory is not defeating something but becoming something, becoming whole, becoming one, becoming yourself. The three sanctuaries await. They have always been waiting. They will wait for you until the moment arrives when you finally choose to enter them and stay.